The first thing Kalen did when the world ended was laugh. It was a dry, cracked sound, utterly devoid of humor, born from the sheer absurdity of the moment. Outside the viewport of his modest orbital hab, the star-scattered blackness of space was being methodically erased. It wasn't an explosion, not a flash of light or a wave of destructive energy. It was a folding. Sections of the cosmos, dotted with the familiar constellations he'd charted as a boy on a long-dead world, simply pinched out of existence, replaced by a profound light-eating gray. The emergency sirens hadn't even had time to fully wail before they were silenced, the station's power grid flickering into oblivion. The only light now came from the soft, bioluminescent glow of the woman standing beside him, her hand finding his in the encroaching dark. Lyra, her name was a prayer on his lips. Her skin, usually a calm cerulean blue, was pulsing with frantic violet patterns of alarm. Her large obsidian eyes, which normally held galaxies of quiet curiosity, were wide with a fear he'd never seen in their 2 years together. "Kalen," she whispered, her voice like wind chimes in a storm. "They are here, the Unmakers." He squeezed her hand, his own rough and calloused against her smooth, cool skin. He was a pragmatist, a man who had bought a companion for a life of sterile efficiency on a lonely frontier world. He had paid for a partner genetically tailored, for resilience and logical compatibility. He had never, not in his most desperate calculations, planned for this, an apocalypse, and the terrifying, beautiful realization that the alien woman he'd acquired was the only thing in the universe that mattered. 2 years earlier, Kalen had stood on the sterile, white landing bay of the Genesis Procurement Center, feeling the hollow echo of his own decision. The air smelled of ozone and antiseptic, a far cry from the rich, loamy scent of the planet Viridia that he now called home. "Are you certain, Mr. Thorne?" the agent had asked, her voice a synthetic purr. "The Lyra series model is one of our most popular for agrarian settlers. High resilience to exotic pollens, efficient sleep cycles, and a pre-programmed understanding of basic horticulture and habitat maintenance. An excellent return on investment." Investment. That was the word they always used. Kalen wasn't a romantic. He was a survivor. Earth was a fading memory, a overpopulated, resource-drained rock. The Frontier Initiative offered land, a future, but at the cost of profound isolation. A solo settlement on a Class 3 world had a 70% failure rate due to psychological collapse. A partnered settlement had a 95% success rate. It was simple math. He'd sold his family's remaining assets, taken the loan, and made the choice. He wasn't paying for love. He was purchasing stability. A practical wife. When the stasis pod hissed open, he saw her for the first time. She was tall and slender, with skin the color of a twilight sky. Her hair wasn't hair at all, but a cascade of fine, silvery tendrils that shifted and swayed as if in a gentle breeze. She wore a simple gray shipsuit. Her large black eyes blinked slowly, taking him in without a trace of emotion. "I am Lyra," she stated, her voice melodic but flat. "I am assigned to your settlement on Viridia. My purpose is to ensure its operational success." Kalen nodded, his throat tight. "Kalen Thorne. Welcome aboard." The journey to Viridia was a quiet affair. Their ship, the Stalwart, was a functional block of metal and humming engines. Lyra was efficient. She could calculate nutrient solutions for the hydroponics bay with terrifying speed, optimize their flight path to save 0.03% fuel, and recite the entire geological survey of their allotted territory from memory. But she was also a void. She didn't laugh at the clumsy antics of the ship's mascot bot. She didn't flinch at the violent stellar flares they passed. She ate her nutrient paste with the same mechanical precision she did everything else. Kalen felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. He had bought a flawless machine, and the silence between them was louder than the ship's engines. Viridia was a world of breathtaking, savage beauty. The sky was a perpetual lavender hue, thanks to the high concentration of argon in the atmosphere. The trees were massive, fungal-like structures that glowed with soft greens and golds at night. Giant, jellyfish-like creatures floated serenely in the upper atmosphere, their bioluminescent patterns shifting in complex, unknowable conversations. Their hab was a prefab dome nestled in a valley, beside a river of liquid that shimmered like mercury. The first months were a testament to Lyra's programming. The dome was immaculate. The crops in the aeroponic towers grew with vigorous health. She anticipated his needs before he even voiced them. A tool placed in his hand, a hot meal ready after a long day of calibrating the perimeter sensors. Yet the silence was deafening. He'd try to make conversation. "The jellies are particularly bright tonight," he'd say, staring out at the floating behemoths. "Luminous activity has increased by 12.7%. Lyra would respond without looking up from her data slate. "Correlation to atmospheric pressure shifts suggests it is a mating display." Kalen would just sigh and return to his own silent meal. The first crack in her perfect facade appeared on a cool evening, 6 months in. Kalen, in a fit of nostalgia, had tried to replicate his grandmother's oatmeal cookies using Viridian substitutes. The result was a charred, smoky disaster. He was fanning the smoke alarm, muttering curses when he heard a sound. It was a soft, chiming little noise like tiny bells. He turned. Lyra was standing in the doorway, her head tilted. The sound came again, and he realized with a start that it was coming from her. A laugh. She pointed a slender blue finger at the tray of blackened discs. "The carbon lattice structure is aesthetically divergent from the projected visual in my database." Kalen stared, his annoyance melting into sheer bewilderment. "They're burnt, Lyra, a complete failure." She took a tentative step closer, her obsidian eyes fixed on the cookies. "Failure is a necessary component of iterative learning." She looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw something in those depthless eyes, not data, but a spark of genuine, unprogrammed curiosity. "The scent, however, is pleasing. It is warm." He found himself laughing, a real, genuine laugh that felt foreign in his own chest. "Well, that's one thing, I guess, here." He broke off a piece of the least charred cookie and held it out. She hesitated, then reached out. Her fingers brushed against his, and a faint electric tingle ran up his arm. She placed the piece in her mouth. Her brow, a smooth ridge of blue skin, furrowed slightly. Texture, brittle. Primary flavor profile, carbon. Secondary notes. Sweetness? She looked at him, and the chiming laugh escaped again. "It is a very bad cookie, Kalen." And he laughed with her, the sound echoing in their sterile hab. It was the first time it had ever felt like a home. That night, as he lay in his bunk, he thought about that laugh. That tiny malfunctioning spark of something illogical. It was the first hint of a mystery he hadn't known he was searching for. Who or what was Lyra, really? And why did the sound of her laughter feel like the most important discovery he'd ever made? The laugh changed everything. It was as if a seal had been broken. Lyra began to exhibit quirks. She developed a fascination with the floating jellies, spending hours on the observation deck, not logging data but just watching. She started giving them names. Solomon, who was large and stately. Pip, who was small and darted erratically. She began to ask questions. Not practical ones about crop rotation or energy efficiency, but questions that made Kalen's heart ache with their strange innocence. "Why do you dream, Kalen?" she asked one evening, mending a torn environment suit with impossibly delicate stitches. He paused, setting down his own work. "I don't know. My brain is sorting memories, I suppose. Processing the day. But you dream of things that have not happened. Of places you have never been. Of people you have never met. What is the functional purpose of fiction within the mind?" He had no answer. "It just happens. It's part of being human." She was silent for a long moment, her silver tendrils still. "I do not dream," she said softly. And for the first time, it sounded less like a statement of fact and more like a confession of loss. Another time he found her in the garden, holding a newly bloomed Viridian sun cup, a flower that pulsed with a soft, golden light. A single shimmering tear like liquid diamond traced a path down her cheek. "Lyra, what's wrong?" he asked, his chest tightening. She looked up, startled. "Nothing is wrong. The flower's life cycle is optimal. It is beautiful. The light pattern is a 83% match to a memory fragment in my core data." She blinked and the tear fell. "The correlation creates a pressure in my chest and behind my eyes. It is inefficient." Kalen reached out slowly and wiped the tear from her cheek. Her skin was cooler than a human's, but held a vibrant hum of life. "It's not inefficient, Lyra. It's called feeling. It's what makes things matter." She looked at his finger, then back into his eyes, and the connection between them was so palpable it felt like a physical force. The mysteries deepened. Kalen began noticing things. Lyra would sometimes hum a strange, atonal melody while she worked, a tune that was nothing from the human musical database. She had moments of startling physical prowess, moving with a speed and grace that defied physics, when a support beam once came loose and nearly crushed him. Only for her to be there, holding it aloft with seemingly effortless strength before he could even blink. He started digging. He accessed the encrypted files from Genesis procurement, using old codes he wasn't supposed to have. The files on the Lyra series were superficial, specs on durability, cognitive processing speed, loyalty parameters. But buried deep within the subroutines, he found fragments of code that were unlike anything he'd ever seen. They weren't binary. They were organic fluid, almost musical in their structure. They were tagged with a single recurring symbol, a spiral galaxy seen from an oblique angle, with a single brilliant star at its center. He confronted her one night, his heart pounding. He showed her the symbol on his data slate. "Lyra, what is this?" "It's in your core programming." "It's not human." "What are you?" She stared at the symbol and her entire body went rigid. The warm cerulean hue of her skin drained to a pale, frightened gray. The friendly violet patterns flickered and died. "That is a classified designation," she said, her voice reverting to that flat, mechanical tone from her first day. "The data is not relevant to our operational parameters." "To hell with our parameters," Kalen said, his voice rising. "I need to know. I care about you, not the product they sold me. Where are you from?" She turned away from him, wrapping her arms around herself. "My origin is proprietary information of the Genesis Corporation. Discussing it constitutes a breach of my primary directive." She walked stiffly to her sleeping alcove. They still slept separately, and the door hissed shut. The rejection stung worse than he thought possible. For days, a cold distance settled between them. The hab was quiet again, the laughter gone. Kalen threw himself into his work, repairing the perimeter fence with a grim fury. He was an idiot. He'd started to see a person where there was only a program. The tension broke on the night of the Great Storm. Viridian storms were legendary, with electromagnetic disturbances that could fry unshielded, electronics and winds that could shred durasteel. The alert came too late. The storm was upon them in minutes. A shrieking gust tore a hole in the dome's roof and debris flew everywhere. The power failed, plunging them into emergency lighting. Kalen was thrown against a wall, his head ringing. Through the howling wind and driving rain, he saw a collapsed support beam pinning Lyra's leg. Her face was a mask of pain, her skin a sickly gray. "Kalen!" she cried out, her voice full of a fear that was all too real. He scrambled over, heaving at the beam. It didn't budge. "I can't move it. The structural integrity is failing," she shouted over the storm. "The primary power conduit beneath us is overloading. You have to reroute it manually at the exterior junction box, or the cascade failure will destroy the entire hab." "I'm not leaving you." "You must." Her eyes locked with his, and in that moment, all the programmed artifice was gone. There was only raw, desperate will. "This is not a logical calculation, Kalen. This is a feeling. You must survive." Her words struck him like a physical blow. A feeling. She was choosing him over the mission, over her own safety. It was the most illogical, most human thing she had ever done. He nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He fought his way through the maelstrom to the exterior panel, the wind threatening to tear him from the hull. He managed the reroute, his fingers numb with cold and fear. When he stumbled back inside, the immediate danger had passed, though the storm still raged. He used a hydraulic jack to lift the beam from her leg. It was badly bruised but not broken. As he held her, shivering in the dark, the last of his doubts evaporated. She was not a machine. She was not a product. The mystery of her origin didn't matter. He loved her. This strange, beautiful, alien woman who laughed at burnt cookies and cried over flowers. He held her close as the storm abated. "I don't care where you come from," he whispered into her silvery tendrils. "You are my home." She leaned into him, her body trembling. "Kalen," she whispered back, her voice barely audible. "The symbol, it is the locus, my home. Or it was, before the silence." The storm had passed, but a new, more profound tempest was unleashed within their hab. In the calm of the following morning, with the dome's auto-repair drones buzzing over the damaged sections, Lyra began to speak. The words came haltingly, as if she were fighting against an internal governor with every syllable. "I am not what Genesis told you," she began, her eyes fixed on the steaming cup of nutrient broth Kalen had given her. "I'm not a construct. Not truly. The Lyra series is a lie." Kalen sat opposite her, his hands wrapped around his own cup, saying nothing, giving her the space to find the words. "My people are the Kethri," she said. the name sounding ancient and sorrowful on her tongue. We're a species of empathic synchronists. We communicated not just with language, but by sharing emotional states, memories, light patterns on our skin. Our world was a symphony of shared consciousness. She looked up, and her black eyes were deep wells of grief. The locus you saw, that was our sun, the heart of our symphony. She explained that the Kuthri were explorers, not conquerors. They traveled the cosmos not in ships of metal, but in vessels of solidified light, riding gravitational waves. They were a peaceful, deeply philosophical race. And then we found them, she whispered, her skin flushing a dark, fearful indigo. The Unmakers. We do not know their true name. They are a null space entity, a consciousness, or perhaps a lack of one, that consumes reality not for resources, not for energy, but because it cannot abide existence that is complex, emotional, and unpredictable. They are a cancer on the cosmos, folding space and time into a uniform gray stillness. The Genesis Corporation, she revealed, was not a simple matchmaking service. It was a front for something far more sinister, a scavenger species that profited from apocalypses. They had discovered the Kuthri homeworld just as the Unmakers began their assault. Instead of helping, Genesis had swooped in. They captured refugees, wiped their memories, and repurposed them. Their unique empathic biology made them incredibly adaptable and perceptive companions, perfect for shoring up the fragile psyches of human settlers. Genesis was selling survivors of genocide as merchandise. The practical wife you paid for, Lyra said, a bitter edge to her chime-like voice, is a political refugee. My memories, my people, my very name were suppressed beneath layers of programming. The laughter, the tears. My system has been slowly bypassing the blocks. Your humanity. It is a powerful virus against their code. Kalen felt the world drop out from under him. The scale of it was monstrous. His quiet, simple life on Viridia was built on a foundation of interstellar slavery and mass murder. The woman he loved was a living monument to a crime he couldn't even comprehend. The storm, Lyra continued, her voice dropping to a terrified hush. The impulse. It must have triggered a deeper level alert. A Kuthri distress beacon, buried so deep even Genesis might not have found it. I fear I have broadcast our location to both Genesis and to the Unmakers. The twist landed with the force of a starship crashing into the planet. The stakes were no longer about crop yields or personal loneliness. They were about survival on a cosmic scale. Kalen was no longer just a settler. He was the protector of the last witness to a galactic horror. Lyra was no longer his practical wife. She was the key to understanding an existential threat to all of creation. He stood up, his mind reeling, his heart hammering against his ribs. The choices before him were terrifying. He could contact the authorities, but who could he trust? The Genesis Corporation's influence was everywhere. He could run, but where could they go that the Unmakers couldn't follow? He could try to hide, but Lyra's very biology was a beacon. He looked at her sitting there, vulnerable and afraid, yet with a core of strength that had survived. Memory wipes and interstellar trafficking. He saw not an alien, but the person who had taught him how to feel again. The person who made this dusty lavender world a home. He made his decision. We're not waiting for them to find us, he said, his voice low and steady. We're going to fight back. Lyra looked at him, hope and fear warring in her eyes. Kalen, we are two against entities that erase stars. We have something they don't, he said, crossing the room and kneeling before her, taking her hands in his. We have each other, and we have this. He tapped his temple. Human stubbornness. You said my humanity was a virus against their code? Well, let's give them a damn plague. The following days were a frantic, desperate blur, but woven through the fear was a new, profound intimacy. The secrets were gone. The walls were down. For the first time, they were truly partners. Kalen used every bit of his engineering skill, cannibalizing non-essential systems from the Hab and the Stalwarty. He wasn't building a weapon to fight the Unmakers. Such a concept was laughable. He was building a shield, a scrambler, designed to mask Lyra's empathic signature based on the strange Kuthri code he'd found. As he worked, Lyra began to teach him. She taught him about the Kuthri, not as a dead race, but as her family. She showed him how to interpret the patterns on her skin, how a swirling gold meant contentment, a slow pulse of crimson meant deep affection. She shared the fragments of memory that were returning to her, the song of her mother, the light dances of her childhood friends, the vast, crystalline cities of her world that resonated with the shared joy of millions. One evening, Surrounded by schematics and scattered components, she began to hum that strange atonal melody. "What is that?" Kaylin asked, looking up from a tangled mess of wiring. "It is a lament," she said softly. "A song for the lost. For my world." She looked out at the Viridian sunset, painting the sky in shades of violet and rose. "We do not have a concept of hell as you do. But if we did, it would be silence, the absence of connection. The Unmakers, they are not evil in the way you understand it. They are the ultimate expression of loneliness. They seek to make the entire universe as lonely as they are." Kaylin put down his tools and went to her. He didn't say anything. He just put his arms around her and held her as she hummed her sorrow into his shoulder, her skin glowing with a soft, grieving blue. Another night, as a meteor shower streaked across the sky, they sat on the observation deck, wrapped in a thermal blanket. "I am afraid, Kaylin," she admitted, her voice small. "I am afraid of being captured by Genesis. I am afraid of the silence. But most of all, I am afraid for you. I was brought into your life as a tool, and I have brought this destruction upon you." "Look at me, Lyra," he said, turning her face towards his. "You are not a tool. You are not a product. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me. Before you, I was just surviving. I was counting the days until I died. You taught me how to live. You taught me how to laugh. You taught me that burnt cookies can be a beautiful memory." He smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes. "If this is the end, then I face it with you. And I wouldn't have it any other way." Tears, real human-like tears, welled in her obsidian eyes. "On my world," she whispered, "we did not have a word for your concept of love. It was too small a word for what was simply the air we breathed, the connection that bound us all. But now isolated, alone with you, I understand it, I feel it. It is a specific, focused, brilliant thing. It is not the air. It is the sun." She placed her hand over his heart. "You are my son, Kaylin." He kissed her then, not as a man kissing his purchased companion, but as a man kissing the woman he loved, a woman from the stars who had chosen him in the vast, indifferent cosmos. It was a kiss filled with 2 years of quiet longing, with the terror of their situation, and with a fierce, defiant hope. In that moment, their bond was forged into something unbreakable. They were no longer human and alien. They were Kaylin and Lyra, a new kind of family, a tiny pocket of warmth and connection against the encroaching cold of the universe. The alarm screamed through the hab, shrill and urgent. Kaylin's proximity sensors, which he had extended to a 500,000-kilometer radius, were blaring a red-level alert. "They're here," he said, his voice grim. On the main viewer, a ship dropped out of warp. It was not a Genesis vessel. It was a sleek, predatory thing, shaped like a shard of obsidian, and it seemed to absorb the light around it. The Unmaker. Space itself writhed and sickened in its presence. A moment later, with a flash of white light, a Genesis Corporation cruiser materialized on the other side of the planet, a pristine, white vessel, looking like a medical tool next to the Unmaker's scalpel. "We're caught in the middle," Lyra said, her skin cycling through frantic patterns of alarm. "The scrambler is active," Kaylin said, his hands flying over the console. "It should hide you for a while, but if they get close..." The Unmaker ship didn't fire weapons. It simply extended a tendril of that same light-eating grayness, a probe reaching down towards Viridia. Where it touched the atmosphere, the lavender sky turned to monochrome static. The floating jellies in its path didn't explode. They unraveled, their complex biology simplified into nothingness, their light extinguished forever. The Genesis ship hailed them. A smooth corporate face appeared on the screen. "Lyra Series Unit 734. This is Genesis Retrieval. You are experiencing a critical firmware anomaly. Stand by for memory purge and recovery. Do not resist." "Like hell," Kaylin snarled, and he fired the stalwart's pathetic mining laser at the Genesis ship. It was like throwing a pebble at a tank, but it got their attention. The Genesis ship launched a containment drone. The Unmaker's gray probe continued its slow, inexorable descent. "This isn't working," Lyra cried. "The scrambler is overloading. They have a lock on my signature." Kaylin saw it then. A desperate, insane plan. The Unmaker. It consumes complex data, right? Emotional, chaotic signatures. "Yes," Lyra said, understanding dawning in her eyes. "It is attracted to it. What if we gave it a bigger target?" Kaylin said, his eyes wild. "What if we broadcast your Guthrie lament? Not a distress call, but the song itself. The memory of your entire world. The most complex, beautiful, emotional data stream in this sector. It would be a supernova to their senses, Lyra whispered. But Kalen, the broadcast would have to be raw, unfiltered. It would burn out my neural pathways. I would be lost. The person I am now, the one who loves you, would be gone. The choice was agony. Save her life but lose her mind, her soul, or let the Unmakers take everything. Before he could answer, the Genesis drone latched onto the hull with a deafening clang. The Hab shuddered. Through the viewport, the gray probe was close now, silencing the world below them. "There's no time," Kalen yelled. Lyra looked at him, and in her eyes, he saw not fear but a serene, terrible resolve. She reached out and took his hand. "Let me do this. For my people, for you. It is not a sacrifice. It is a symphony. Let my song be our weapon." She closed her eyes. Her body began to glow with an intensity he had never seen. Every color of the spectrum swirling across her skin, the silvery tendrils of her hair stood on end, crackling with energy. The atonal lament, now woven with the memory of her laughter, her tears, her love for him, began to emanate from her. Not as sound but as a pure, focused data stream. Kalen slammed his hand on the console, routing the entire output of the Hab's transmitter, the stalwart's comms, every ounce of power they had into amplifying her song. The effect was instantaneous. The Unmaker's probe halted. The gray tendril recoiled as if burned. The obsidian ship itself seemed to shudder. The chaotic, beautiful, painful symphony of a dead civilization was poisoned to its null state existence. It began to fold in on itself, the grayness churning violently. The Genesis ship, caught in the periphery of the broadcast, was also affected. Their systems, designed to suppress Cathri empathy, were overwhelmed. Lights flickered across their hull, and they began a frantic, uncontrolled retreat. But the cost was terrible. Lyra's glow was fading. The vibrant colors on her skin were bleaching to a dull, lifeless gray. She slumped to the floor. "Lyra!" Kalen was at her side in an instant, gathering her into his arms. Her body was cold. Her eyes were open, but they were vacant, the galaxies within them gone dark. "Lyra, please," he begged, tears streaming down his face. "Come back to me. Don't you dare leave me alone in this silence." There was no response. The Unmaker was gone. Genesis was in retreat. He had won, and he had lost everything. 3 cycles passed. Viridia began to heal. The gray scar in the sky faded, and the lavender hue returned, though the floating jellies were fewer now, their patterns more subdued, as if in mourning. Kalen moved through the Hab like a ghost. He had repaired the damage, but the silence was back, heavier and more profound than ever. He kept Lyra's body in a medical stasis pod, unable to let go, clinging to the hollow shell of the woman he loved. He was in the garden, mechanically tending to the sun cups, when he heard it. A soft chiming sound. He froze, his heart seizing in his chest. It couldn't be. He turned slowly. Lyra was standing at the entrance to the garden. The stasis pod was open and empty. She was leaning against the frame for support, her skin a pale but steady blue. Her eyes were open, and in their obsidian depths a single, tiny star of consciousness was struggling to reignite. She looked at the sun cup in his hand, then at his face, her brow furrowed in that familiar, beautiful way. Texture brittle. Primary flavor profile. Carbon, she whispered, her voice a rough, unused imitation of its former chime. Secondary notes. Sweetness? A sob racked Kalen's body, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. He stumbled towards her, catching her as she swayed. He held her as if she were made of starlight, which in a way she was. Her memory was fragmented. She didn't remember the Unmakers or the broadcast or her real name, but she remembered him. She remembered the feeling of his hand in hers. She remembered the joke about the burnt cookies. She was not the Lyra he had lost. That symphony was over. But a new melody was beginning, built on the same foundational notes of love and connection. The journey to rebuild her would be long, but it was a journey he would take with a heart full of hope. As he held her, looking out at their quiet, wounded, beautiful world, a final thought settled in his mind, a quiet revelation that held the weight of the future. The Unmakers were driven off not by a weapon, but by a love song, and as his eyes scanned the starfield, now once again clear and bright, he couldn't shake the feeling that Lyra's broadcast had been heard by more than just their enemies. Somewhere in the deep and listening dark, another light had flickered in response. The silence had been broken, and an echo was on its way.